there's a hidden rhythm beneath our reality. Coded in music, media, and memory. I'm Dr. Hans Utter, and I invite you into the resonant state. Join me as we explore the secrets of sound, mind control, consciousness, and the frequencies that shape your world. Subscribe now. We tune your perceptions.
Special treat. We are sharing the show with our good friend Hans Utter, and later in a few minutes we will be joined by our other good friend, Ms. Carrie Olaje. And today we will be discussing, we will be going further down the rabbit hole of Qliphoth investigations and understanding with Hans. This will be part 4, I believe. And today we are going to be discussing another aspect of the working, which involves time and the manipulations of that time and how we perceive in our minds. I guess Hans will be better at describing that for us. But first, welcome, Hans. Hello.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me again. It's good to be here.
I love you, man. It's great to have you again.
Thank you, dude. I need some love, man. It's been a hard ride here, here on the front lines, hopefully. But yeah, so within this process, as I generally speaking, if something my intuition guides me to something, it turns out generally I found that it's been correct. So I keep unveiling or finding more and more things about the Qliphoth stuff. I have a trove of actual documents related, probably about 10 to 15,000 pages or more, related to actual practices, right? And there's a whole school, and this includes about an 800-page document from the Order of the Nine Angles, and they're also involved in Qliphoth magic. So it's a lot more. At some points I thought, again, using it sort of as a paradigm, right, as a template to understand things, kind of hoping that stuff wasn't actually being deployed, but it certainly, regrettably, yes, that is the case.
Right.
So
it's basically the Order of Nine Angles is using it, and the other orders are using it as if it's just like it's just a system that's always been there, just like the Kabbalah is used by many orders because it's something that works and it's true, right?
Well, yeah, but it's also, see, this is tied into all these other types of working. So I think we had a conversation on the phone. So basically, you get aggregates of multiple people. It's very easy to steer these people into doing these practices, right? So you're aggregating these energies, which are really related to, there's a lot of different things going on. It's quite complex, but, we're looking at also, so I think, last time we looked at some of the media things. What makes it difficult to kind of grasp this is it's so interconnected with so many different things. And you have the numerology, you have events, and now which is sort of looming on the horizon in a certain way is how this is being used to shift and shape the whole society or even the whole planet to move towards a certain direction, right? And so some of these events, some of the stuff can be planned out, because I always thought, how could this stuff be going? These plans, some of them go for hundreds, thousands of years. How's that possible? Well, I figure that out. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the exact event is going to be done in that way, but example being Charlie Kirk's assassination, the movie Snake Eyes, right? Or that there was that show like Twilight Zone where there was a President Trump, and at that time Donald Trump must have been like 10 years old, right? So and you see these things across the board, and it's more than predictive programming. Predictive programming is one thing. This is a type of working that's creating a future state that is desired with particular outcomes. And, so you're sort of directing the matrix of possibilities. And so in a certain way, you're capturing the flow of time as well as the mind and consciousness, as well as the world. So, and on that regard, I just thought I'll just read a couple passages here. This is from one of these Qliphoth working books. This is Dante Mail Transcendental Shadow Magic. So a lot of the Qliphoth is connected with the shadow magic, right? So I'll just read a bit of this here. So transcendental shadow magic is a process of the initiate of the black arts, the initiate of the black arts goes through in order to achieve an awakening of their shadow self. The shadow can be viewed in Jungian psychological terms or in metamagical ways. The basic principle remains the same either way. It is the arduous process of coming to know one's darker self. Darkness and the shadow are the sources of self creation. So, in a sense, people are being trained and taught to become vehicles of these various sort of demonic energies or whatever associated with the Qliphoth. Okay, next paragraph. Darkness exists beyond the realm of the living, on the periphery of ordinary human conscious expression. The shadow is our own personal internal black flame, mirror image of this great creative magical force known as darkness. It is more than just a reflection or an image of ourselves cast outward beyond ourselves. It has substance. This substance is a sort of essence of being. It needs to be charged, concentrated, and empowered. Over the course of time and with much effort on the magician's part, the shadow self can be imbued with consciousness and self-expression. It is, in a very literal sense, the double or doppelganger. It is the source of such legendary things as biolocation, anthropomorphism, and vampirism. The shadow can continue to live on beyond the physical death of the body. However, it is at this point the double needs to be brought back into the self. If the self and the double remain separate, then um, drastic results can take effect. Um, the magician must master the self first, then master the shadow. So the shadow is under full control of the self as an aspect of the self. It goes on. Okay, this isn't something to dabble with. Doors can be open, which thereafter cannot be closed. It is reoccurring theme of the black arts and lightly so. So I could keep going, but this is this is basically sort of an intro. It goes into astral realms and all this other things. And so I wish I could see this picture. I have some picture, but basically, so that's just that introduction. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, Sean.
Ah, so so the you were talking about how the predictive programming is actually part of the working, because everybody talks about how, oh, the predictive programming, like we could see 9/11 and The Simpsons and all these other, like you were saying, the Charlie Kirk thing and the Trump thing when he was 8 years old. um it it's part of the working, and it's pushing and it's framing the future in our minds. um and let's see, uh the black flame being the shadow self, and how to empower that shadow to take over and to have a new self. That black flame is the same black flame as Russ Dizdar talks about, I'm assuming. uh
Uh,
you know and so anyway, this I guess I just wanted to bring in Carrie, because Carrie is here. Hello,
oh,
Carrie,
great.
welcome.
Yeah. I'll just say one last thing. So the reason how that ties in is because the shadow self enters into the pseudo time, right? So you start creating these different timelines. This is like Qliphoth working types of magic. There's like a picture here, Children of the Black Poems for Children of the Black Sun, which I guess I can't share that. Maybe I can, but anyways, hey Carrie, welcome. I didn't
Welcome,
see you. I
Carrie.
was looking at the PDF.
Okay,
Hi. Can you guys
good.
hear me?
Yes, your audio works good, and you're on the show, and we're recording now, so be aware that we're
I
anyway.
got it.
um Hans is discussing with us about how time is manipulated, and the future of reality can be guided through Qliphothic magic. Um, And when we spoke on the phone, when Hans and I spoke on the phone, he was talking about the possibilities of divination and like oracles. And, you know, as he's explaining it to me, I was like, oh, yeah, just like Carrie, what happened with her in Washington, D.C. And he was like, what? And I shared with him the episode that we did, the Mothers of Darkness episode. I forget which number on my which number it was. But anyway, it was a fantastic episode. You know, we were a little tired. We were recording late, but we got some very good information that one. And you were used as an oracle, and through the torture that they did to you, it awoke in you a ability that they thought was divination, and they used you as an oracle. Um, so I figured this would be a wonderful conversation to have both of you together, and for him to ask you questions, and for you to learn more from him, and what. Um, I just think this would be a delightful recording. So I'm very glad that you could join us, and as well, I'm delighted to have Hans as well. Like these are the kind of shows that I really love, you know. So thank you, and I guess let's go back with Hans, unless you have something else to say, and we can go further into
No,
this and kind of
just
get
to
on the
thank
road.
you for yeah, just to thank you for inviting me on. You know, once you told me about that, I did look into, you know, I started listening to even more of like your work with Hans, because I know you've done several, and wonderful
Yeah.
to meet you. And yeah, no, it was really interesting to see some parallels, and like, you know, like to both like the system mapping kind of thing, and then, you know, parts and maybe like the progression that they get brought through in this kind of occult process of like conditioning. But yeah, so I just want to say thank you, you know, for having me here for this conversation. And I don't want to interrupt, because I know it sounded like Hans was on a pretty cool roll already. So
I
thank you.
lost my train of thought, Sean.
It's all
Yeah,
gone.
Sean is
Just
so
blame Sean. It's
Sean is very positive. He's
I try.
smiling. Yeah, just
That's all right. I'll carry us
no,
along.
it's good. It's good.
Smile.
We need to be positive, but yeah. So I mean, this is you know, I think it relates also on the individual consciousness level. It relates on so many different layers. But so this, what I was doing, I was reading. I got this big compendium, which kind of shocked me, of all basically Qliphoth workings, like manuals for people that are doing all this stuff, right? And these are like really hardcore. Like some of the books I didn't even want to look at. You know what I mean? Some of them I just opened the first page. I'm like, dude, I'll look at that later. But
Yeah.
so basically, so the divination thing, okay, that you know, the trajectory to create events, in situations that are moving in a certain direction. I think we all know what that direction is. Um, Also the shadow self, which is one of the beginning phases of the sort of the entering into this black arts, was basically a doppelganger of yourself that can. So in a certain way, I think that they're also trying to push the population into this almost like doppelganger shadow self realm, right? Because this realm, then you can have control. And just I'll just read a bit of this, and I'll let you guys talk. I just wanted to finish this. So it's another book on the Qliphoth. So this is Imaginary Magic. Okay. What Peter Carroll in Liber Chaos on page 29 calls pseudo time and shadow time. Pseudo time here is a perpetual present tense where there is no future and no past in physical material reality. So that's one type of time where you have no future and no past, right? You're taken out of the time stream, right? And then shadow time then is the etheric probabilistic projection orthogonal to pseudo time, the concept of which of the future, the concepts of which, the concepts of future and past, the interaction of pseudo time and shadow time in each present tense event is, which is reckoned as one Planck time and length. There is a collapsing Schrodinger wave function from probability 0, impossibility, to probability 1, certainty. The operant observer principle is not mentioned. So this is using the quantum stuff, the observer, right? And this is where there was that famous experiment, right, with the electrons, and basically they would change position. They could be in 2 different positions because of the observer, right? You have the 0 and the 1. So this is that juncture point where you manipulate the manifestation of the future, including pseudo time. You can think of pseudo time as a perpetual present, right? People are locked into, think of Groundhog Day, right? That's a great example of being in pseudo time. Every day is the same, right? You're just, you seem like you're going, but you're not really going. You're just stuck, right? But then they're interjecting these with the shadow time to create probabilities. I'll just finish a little bit more. Pseudo time interjects itself upon a number line, which can be reckoned as the expanding light cone of entropy, or the standard forward flowing hour of time. Shadow time and pseudo time must be divided by something akin to a strange attractor in order for the collapsed waveform of probability to alternate or spiral around the shadow temporal axis. So this is actually how this is being done in a scientific manner. So it sounds, I can hold this up here. You can see that. Here's the pictures of how the pseudo time or shadow time relates to normal time, right? So in a sense, it's an ejection out of the normal world, out of the normal temporal flow into this shadow time or pseudo time where all these parameters can be manipulated, right? In a sense. So I'll leave it there. I can do more. I don't know if that's too dense, but is that, you guys kind of following me with that? Or
So would it be, I'm trying to understand the shadow time better. Is it accessing a place that is outside of time, as in it's like repeating the same moment over and over, or it's outside of time as in it's like all things happening at once kind of thing, like we're
uh, so basically, if you look at it like, say, where um, the pseudo time is basically, you could say, you almost call it like, say, a dissociation state or whatever. This is the entry point to the shadow time, right? So this is how you even move populations. So the shadow time is something that's if you see this picture, so these are like this picture right here. These are like sort of this is like a relationship of regular time to this pseudo shadow time, right? Or this here. So basically, you're splitting off the axis, right? You're splitting off the normal temporal flow of reality, going into this constructed or manipulated shadow time, right? So you're being, so this is kind of how that. There's another diagram. It gets pretty dense or complex, but it's all
Right.
based on like quantum theory and occult working. Um, so is that more
Is that
clear?
is that
More
from
okay?
that's from the John Gee book?
Yeah. This has a really interesting section on that.
Right.
So yeah, it's a John Gee book. So in the strange attractors, basically, the strange attractors are basically, you could look at those as events or ritual spaces or energetic configurations that will guide the shadow time into the desired outcomes, right? So it's based on this kind of quantum theory. You could think of it like someone, you may have experienced it, Carrie. I don't know, but like when you're not in yourself, you are almost ejected into kind of an astral, non-temporal state. You're living your life, but you can't get to it. It's like you're blocked. And a lot of times people won't even recognize that's happening, right? Because it's quite terrifying. Say, well, I'm in some astral, non-physical dimension, right? Which unfortunately I've experienced that. It's really no fun. I don't recommend it. But this can be done to entire populations. You can use certain things such as say like 9/11 or whatever, in a certain way. That's that event. It's like a year zero, right? You're zeroing out, and then boom, you have the 2 pillars, and suddenly here's the fixed progression. We're going from here to global control grid, whatever, end of history, so to speak, right? So these are is that, hopefully that makes sense. It is a little bit dense when they get to all the quantum stuff, but
I mean, it makes sense, and it is, especially if it, like, for me, all I'm bringing really to this conversation is like the experiential side of things when it comes to, you know, trauma-based mind control and like, you know, occult abuse and stuff like that, because that was, you know, what characterized my past. So from like an experiential standpoint, like, yeah, a lot of the things you even mentioned it yourself that you are describing like are like very common experiences for survivors of this kind of stuff, because that is, you know, like that moment of intense trauma, you know, your strange attractor or whatever, that is like that point at which, you know, you have a part of the consciousness that, at least perception wise, is going to be in their own stuck version of time that is outside of the normal flow of time. You know, that's a lot of what makes healing very complicated, you know, and why, you know, survivors deal with so much difficulty in different parts, like really understanding each other and getting on the same page experientially, because, you know, the parts that are created in the trauma are stuck in that time and place and that belief about themselves and the world, etc. And then, you know, and it's very hard for them to like reconcile when you're healing and dealing with these, you know, memories, you know, that now you know, look a certain way, you know, that you had normal experiences as a kid, you know, for example, that weren't involved with like trafficking or, you know, occult abuse or something like that, because for those parts that was the whole world. And that's kind of the whole, you know, the whole mechanism, in my opinion, of programming, you know, is that they're going to use scripts like in very like intentional stories, rituals, etc., to achieve like a certain outcome they know is going to happen in the mind, you know. But it, you know, the way you bring it to a larger population too, yeah, I definitely also see that, you know, in culture creation and stuff, is that it's like a seeking to mimic that same version of mind control, essentially, into, you know, whole populations.
Right. Culture creation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I think that these things. I mean, again, this you know, of course, like say ancient China, right? They had the model of the human body as a mirror of the universe, right? So these that are happening on an individual level, this is also in a certain way um, being deployed. And like I said, in this text, at least some of these passages aren't great, but this goes through. You know, so basically, these create summoning spaces, right? So that's where you can evoke. This is now you're in the realm of where these entities live, right? Or these demonic forms or forces or energy configurations, however you want to term them. You know, and there's all kinds of different things out there. I don't know if you've encountered that, like all kinds of stuff. You know, unfortunately, like
Cool that that Sean had mentioned, you know, for me, like why I was given that role, and the particular role in the cult, you know, was because that was the whole ritual trauma event was put there to see like if I would be able to, you know, channel, access, whatever, this, you know, this outside space, you know, which is where, you know, that's where I see like these kind of, you know, these different entities or something or whatever, whether we're talking about archetypes or you know, actually like actual, you know, gods, elemental forces, etc. You know what I mean? That's like kind of like the whole you know, I don't necessarily believe in like the multiverse idea, like where there's like a million universes, but I definitely believe, you know, at this point, feel like I understand that there's different levels of, you know, dimensionality, I guess, you know, and that, you know, they don't all experience time the same way. That's kind of the point of why they try and access this, you know, stuff in the occult, is like you're saying, to be able to have some sort of knowledge that they wouldn't normally be able to have if they were just living in like normal, you know, meat space.
Yeah, the demons and such, they don't live in time, right? So they know what happens at the end of the universe, and they know what happens at the beginning too. I mean, what do you think?
potentially. I mean,
Potentially, right? 'Cause,
potentially.
I mean, it could be changed with
I don't
free
think it's
will,
that
right?
far
The
reaching,
future,
but yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right. Because I mean, it's not exact future because it's potentials, right? Carrie talked about how it wouldn't be exact because it's still unwritten, right? Is that how it went? Like you would be, they would,
So
go ahead.
so in my experience, I like, you know, I have very little that I've like shared or stuff about like things that were asked of me or something, you know, but in my experience, it was all very mundane stuff and very much related to the material realm and very much like not far reaching. Like you're saying, like me or you might be like, oh my gosh, I have access to all of the information of like just tell me like how does, you know, what is the point of like what's the meaning of life, you know what I mean, and what's the like ultimate end of everything, which, you know, I still feel firmly is that, you know, everything returns to like, you know, Godhead or positivity, whatever you want to call it, you know what I mean? But for them, it was usually like more like, okay, like how do I get one up, like business knowledge that would give me an advantage over like a rival or something like that, which is stuff that's like very, so to me, like that is the kind of stuff that like you might say demons or, you know, outside entities would, you know, is a little bit more in their realm. You know what I mean, like of stuff. And I think ultimately like maybe yeah, the demons also understand that like they're fighting a losing battle, but that doesn't mean they're not going to try and like, you know, prolong it as long as possible, you know, the inevitable.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And so, you know, I don't think, I mean, you know, you can just look at it as these are just gradients of spectrums, right? You have different types of waveform, material body. Obviously, we have our thought, we have our consciousness, we have different layers just of ourselves, right? You can perceive on higher frequency perception, right? You know what I mean? Depending on what you're attuned to or aligned to, right? People are more sensitive, you know what I mean, to certain things. You can come in a room, you can sense the people, you know, and sometimes maybe you don't want to, but so that's an example of these types of things. So, but the one thing, at least in my experience, I mean, when you get to that plane, it compared to normal consciousness, it's extremely fast, extremely densely packed. It's much faster than the normal conscious mind can track, right? So in that sense, you could say it's at a time. I think you know it's. But anyways, I'll just read a little bit more of this, but hopefully, you know, we'll get a sense of that. And so, you know, of course, you know, this can be used for simple, just, you know, small scale endeavors, right? But then you go back to like the Oracle of Delphi and all these other things. And also just, you know, stuff that was generated maybe 100 years ago, maybe 1,000 years ago, right? That are part of particular processes, right, that are going. And I agree with you. I think it's not exactly working out as intended, right? There's some plan B stuff going on right now. Even though, you know, that there's a, you know, trying to sort of generate in everybody the inevitability, which is very common. Oh, it's inevitable. Like, you know, AI,
Right.
you know, AI control grid. I mean, you can't even, I mean, you know, it's not going to work. I don't think it's possible. Right. And even the Epstein stuff coming out like that really, I feel like did some serious damage to this whole shadow cabal group.
Right. They're not as occulted
Yeah.
anymore.
I think, and one thing I just want to comment on, like what you said too, is like that I wanted to give the caveat that I'm not saying that they, you know, if we're talking about like the parasite class that, you know, the occult workers we're talking about, I'm not saying that they always, there's different levels of them, you know, so I'm not saying that necessarily that they always are after like what me or you would consider like superficial things, because I think that at higher levels it is more about controlling, you know, larger amounts of the population, or, you know, as in like the world, you know, pushing towards like a certain agenda, you know. And I would even have that in my own life, is that a lot of the occult use I had was for like local covens and stuff like that, you know, like sometimes there would be people visiting from outside, but it was generally, you know, I wasn't permanently stationed in like DC or something where like it was really large rituals, you know, going on. It was like, you know, more, you know, low to mid level. I don't really know like the general like scheme of things, you know.
So there was probably
but
many more of you, more children
yeah,
like
oh,
you.
for sure. I would assume so. Like I can't say, oh yes, 100%, you know, but from what I saw, yes, there would be, I don't know, you know, every state, every region, every fucking city. I don't know, like I don't know, like, you know, how how common it is, other than knowing that, yeah, it's like that's kind of the idea. But then the ritual that I was used for when I was reaccessed in Paris, basically in 2015, like that one was like a different level, basically, that in general I had not been used for in the past, you know, where it was like you know, it was, you know, it was right before the terrorist attacks and stuff. It was something that, like, you know, from my understanding, you know, it was much more, you know, much more elite, much more like what it was trying to affect, you know, the location being like Chartres Cathedral and stuff like that. Just like a lot of different things, like
Wow.
that. It was, you know, it was obvious to me that that kind of thing was meant to affect like a larger population. So that's all, you know, kind of wanted to like comment. You know, it
Makes
was like
sense.
that. I didn't know if I made that, you know, clear from my story, but I also feel like it does kind of like, you know, echo what Hans is saying about, you know, just about there being these, you know, that the rituals are a large part of them trying to affect the general, you know, timeline, essentially.
Right. That's what Hans was saying when you first came in about predictive programming being part of the working. And so, Hans, do you have a comment about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's because I think the predictive programming can be seen as a, okay, predictive to a certain degree, but also as a ritual, as a magical endeavor to make it manifest, right? So it's not, and you're also aggregating. A lot of this is based on force aggregation. You're getting all these people's consciousness now focused on the thing you want to have happen, focused on the goal, right? And like 9/11, there's so many of these things. So, but this is aggregating these images in people's minds. It's creating the energy, right, that can be utilized to do these things, right? Because I mean, these are, I mean, there's a lot of the fundamental sort of laws or principles of the universe. I mean, this is kind of like hacking, right? They're hacking it, right? They're doing this. And it's even a lot of the quantum stuff. Like I think the multiverse stuff. I mean, see this stuff, at least for me, like I want to live in reality, right? I don't want to just say, okay, I make the world, it's all just just an illusion. And I just, whatever I see is just me. I've created everything. You can create your own approach to life, your own states. You can change how you approach situations. But if you get into that, you're risking going into psychotic or pseudo time, into shadow time. So you can be ejected into shadow time, right? And um I just finish this, Sean, and then I'll quiet. But
Sure.
so
No,
um
man.
so just read a bit more. So since the present tense pseudo time, so again, pseudo time is, you could say, like the trauma moment, right? Where it breaks the chain of past, present, and future, right? It creates this eternal present almost, right? So this is the doorway to the shadow time. This is the opening. This is the gate to enter the shadow time, right? Since the present tense pseudo time, strange attractors can connect to the immediately past or immediately future strange attractors, shadow time. So strange attractors is like wherever magnetic fields, you know about that, right? So it's kind of a science thing. Okay, it is a science thing. Okay, it also represents a combination of 6 strange attractors plus or minus for each present. Um, Negative and positive for past and for future. And when it is graphed in 3 dimensions over time, as coordinate triplicates plus spin can be decomposed to form a 4 matrix measuring the 4 possible probability states: yes, no, yes, and no, and neither yes or no. And I'll just read one more paragraph. This is one of the primary laws the manipulator magician learns to govern, the law of irony. No means yes, war is peace, freedom is slavery, work brings freedom. The following statement is true, the preceding statement was false. These examples of one-step self-referential impossible feedback loops combine variables of logic in formula with double-think mind control as a coordinate pair on a Cartesian graph. Um, so it goes on. So this is inversion, and then banishing ritual, interior, exterior. So basically, then he goes on to talk about how they're using this to connect with these sort of entities that are on different axes and aggregate their power, or also, like in your case, like an individual, right? So, Carrie, does any of that resonate with you or make sense?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it was our last episode that me and you did, Sean, that I was afraid like turn into like a flaming clusterfuck because I was like, for any of them, one that was the listener, only
It
because I was going
it was
over
far
like
out,
this. It was, I know, and I still feel like
but
I'm
it's
like,
all
this is
good.
one of the things that yeah, well, I mean, it's the first time I've tried like really explaining something, which I know sounds complex and crazy and probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and maybe the drawings help a little bit more, but I mean they're not three-dimensional models like I would like them to be to try and explain the same thing and make a little bit more sense. But that being said, I mean that is where I guess in my experience it would resonate, at least is when you're dealing with like the world building of all of the different dissociative parts, because the survivor ends up living way more in, like way more of their parts, way more of their consciousness is living in their own, fantasies, their own traumas and stuff like that than they are in being present in like
Right, the shadow time.
present time and present reality and stuff like that. Like most of their consciousness is kind of stuck in those, in those areas that have been created for them intentionally by these like, these dark magicians, these programmers, and everything. But that for me, that was a big part of the structuring of the system, was that, it had it was plotted on like X, Y, and Z, a grid like axis. So there was coordinates that belonged to uh, all of these different parts, like where they, where the um, basically our own like programming parts of the system that were there to like to hold the knowledge of like this like overall map, and then also to know how to like access these different points essentially, as well as like a lot of it was like keyed towards like clocks, like different times of year for rituals, different birthdays for certain transitions or stuff like that basically. But yeah, but it was all ultimately arranged on on a grid. Each one had this like, it's completely fictional because it doesn't exist anywhere other than in my own head, but in my head it feels like a very like physical like arrangement of these different parts, and it was 100% created. I mean, it wasn't organic to my dissociation. It was something that was intentionally programmed to be that way. And I think a lot of why there's with like the Qliphoth and like you know this occult path working, like it's part of why it's systematized is a very scientific approach on like how to create these effects in reality, but then also in like individuals' minds, which we know create their own reality and everyone else's on a certain level too. So
Right, like when they make the whole population create their own weirdo shadow time, then everybody's living in that false reality, right? They're trying to make everybody, like we were saying before, how they're trying to do, or what you were saying is they were trying to put the individual type trauma-based mind control on all of us. And 9/11 is a good example, and the Charlie Kirk murder is another one where we have to see the trauma. I mean, Gaza, like all the babies burning, and it affects us in a traumatic way, and it kind of breaks us from the normal time that we experience. Um, and then they can push the future working that they intend for us through that manipulation of our imagination. Uh, is that right, Hans?
That I mean, imagination is actually one of the most powerful and most potentially beneficial and but also dangerous, right? Faculties that we have, right? So in a sense, through imagination, like especially you're doing with like well, maybe you don't want to do that, but I mean, you can invoke things like even if you want to invoke, say, a protective field around yourself, right? So you're going to do that through imagination, but you can start to generate that to a certain extent. If you keep doing it, you may actually get a pretty good shield. Um, or not. If there's a hole in it, then it's not fun. But that being said, what you're saying. So, I think like this, it would be interesting. I think what you just said would we could probably ascertain like exactly how they were graphing this stuff. You know what I mean? And it sounds like it's very systematized in that way. What you're saying, Carrie. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And so sometimes the imagination serves as a bridge for these things. And so, if you don't mind, I'm going to read a few of these. These are just like but I don't think they're actually invocations. They're just like little poems describing some of these crossroads entities, whatever, that people try to connect with doing this shadow magic, where again, they're splitting into their shadow self. They're creating the shadow self. They can also operate in the pseudo time. They can also operate in a sense, trying to merge the pseudo time into the, real
Path of
flow.
real time.
Yeah. And so that's how you create these juncture points or whatever. But I'll just read this. Hopefully it's nothing shows up. Whoa.
Oh yeah,
right
it's
here.
not a real
Yeah,
invocation.
I don't think it's a real ritual.
Don't worry, listeners.
Don't worry. No, this is, so I just found, these seem pretty benign. They're more like kind of poems. I wish I could share these pictures. Are pretty freaky though. But anyways,
are they from the Gee book? Because I can.
No, this is different. Yeah, this is the Gee book. I'm just that's about it. After that, he just veers off into some BS, and then it's kind of he kind of spazzes out. Then I think he's actually trying to induce the readers to
right.
He's writing in such a way with hypnotic command structures in the book. And remember, I think I pulled that out on the show. So that's kind of where the book just basically just becomes a worthless pile of garbage.
I'm sorry, but that's kind of what the Order Nine Angles materials are doing, is inducting the reader into finding his inside Satan, the shadow self, and becoming that instead, and changing, flipping, and but those words that they read, all that material, it's all over the internet, and all these Nexions, and they're all creating more material, and there's no, anyway, it's that's flooding these people with this mind control, and it's changing their heads.
No, and exactly. So like this book itself, like, so from after that point, right? So he talks a little bit about how the magicians will communicate with entities, or they'll use like, say, like the scribe, like John Dee. And then it just goes into all kinds of stuff. It says the human nervous system is a virus. And then it just starts jumping here and there, and just because basically the reader hits all this complex scientific information, you're going to get neural overload. And then you read and it starts making sense, but he's just jumping topic to topic. By the end of it, he's convinced you that you are literally, your brain and nervous system is a virus. You are a virus. And it's anyways. So I'll read this wonderful poem. This is the Black Lotus Cult. So Holy Mother, and these are the kind of things they're trying to access. So Holy Mother, kneel before my hallowed altar and bathe in blood from holy slaughter. My sacrament is like no other, Virgin Crone and Holy Mother. I am the goddess of war. I am the sacred whore. I am the best you ever wish you had. I slay the temple priest and slit the throat of your beast. I am the space between good and bad. Then they have this, what he gets into this is your id or super ego, which they start using Freudian stuff to also sort of create some kind of hypnotic induction. But so id, super ego. I'm living inside you, watching the world behind your eyes, seeing your fears and making you cry. I'm breathing inside you. Every time you move, I steal a breath, bringing you one day closer to death. I'm dreaming inside you, running the nightmares through your head, feeding the monsters under your bed. I'm screaming inside you, never relenting endless pain, dragging my nails across your brain. I'm dying inside you, taking you with me as I die. Voice in your head becomes a lie. I am. So and then I'll just read one more. The Sacrament of the Red Serpent. So my flesh is the flesh of the rising serpent. My eyes, the eyes of 1,000 moons bleeding. My voice, the primogenian call from eons to eons. My womb, a black hole in the cosmos. Okay, so this is that black hole, right? Cosmic black hole. Okay. Primigenian. I think that word Primigenian. Primigenian. Cool word.
Seems like the
Primal,
beginning,
primordial, but
right.
call from aeons to aeons.
Generate.
My womb, a black hole in the cosmos, a porthole of inner wisdom. My mouth, the venom of 1,000 serpents. My arms, tentacles of whispering typhoons. My presence, the infinite void, devouring humanity. I am the red serpent whose name is Babylon, Babylon.
Wow.
So I don't know if there's more and more of that, but I'll leave it there. But they go into using tunnels of set going into these astral planes. It's very clearly mapped out. And I definitely don't recommend people get into that stuff. I would say
That's the Order of Nine Angles stuff.
no, it's not. This is another book. The Order of Nine Angles. That is super. That's way. That's like this is the most gentle material that I have. So this is what'd you think of that? Those little artistic hymns or whatever they are. I don't think they're actually workings. That's why I read them. They're not workings, but they're just okay. Go ahead. I don't know what you thought about that.
No, but they would be good programming material. I mean, it's
right.
like this is because I mean they're I'm trying to figure out how to describe it. I mean that's kind of the whole point in a lot of like the traumatic rituals when it comes to creating like occult identified parts or stuff, or parts that are going to have like occult or ritual knowledge or purposes later on or anything like that, is that in my experience they're intentionally creating the identity of the dissociative split that they know is going to occur at the time of the trauma during the ritual, and then that dissociative split they're going to give the identity of they want you to quote unquote really access these kinds of entities on, I think, like an outside astral plane kind of aspect, but on another level they also it's necessary to have like a part in the system that identifies as that to be able to access it, or even if we're just talking about just that part is going to be continually playing a certain role in a ritual, and they we're just talking about like a trafficking acting gig where you really they're selling my or other slave services to perform a role in a ritual, and the people at the ritual are expecting a certain like picture like an acting gig like a certain mannerisms or way of being or certain archetypes that you're expressing. Like that was kind of the main thing that was always like apparent to me with all of the occult stuff, is like there was a lot of different there was a lot of different names of different deities from different religions, different time periods and stuff like that were used especially for like creating specific altars and stuff like that, parts or for specific rituals. But that ultimately, like when it came to like my whole structure of like deity allied altars, basically it was like a specific archetype, and that was kind of what they always came back to, was like that's where the real, for them and their interpretation, that's where the real power lied. It wasn't like, oh, we're Satanists and Satan has all the power, but they do have an idea of like a dark god that's often represented as like a horn god or something like that represents all of the different entities that people might say is quote unquote like Lucifer, Satan, Moloch, like Baal, Hammon, like there's just like, so, but to them it would be different expressions of like the same archetypal force, and it was the same for for the goddess type stuff, and for me it was mainly like the a lot of what you described in your poems is like the it's like the dark feminine, essentially. So because to them, and that's kind of a lot of what I see presented nowadays in culture creation, is like for them it's like the dark and light are often like equal but opposite, like they don't really see any issue with like they just prefer the darkness, and that's cool, and that's just the role that they're playing, but that ultimately they feel like they perform just as valid a role in the world or society or something as anything else. And it's the same for like the occult working stuff, is that the, when you're dealing with Black mothers, mothers of darkness and stuff like that, that it's, it's someone that can produce life, but then chooses to destroy it, or it's the state, like you said in the poem, it's a sacred whore, you're dealing with like essentially like what it seems like a lot of the, Illuminati type people have exploited, because a lot of channels, most of them are women. This is because it's, it's a force that they want to control and exploit, essentially. And that, this ability to create but then also destroy is like the complete like the complete package to them, you know what I mean? So yeah, so, and just what you're saying, like a lot of like what you read, that is the kind of stuff that would like be, you would go through a ritual event that creates these splits, creates these channels, like you're, for me, it's like with the Artemis one, it's like you're dealing with having witnessed a ritual, participated in a ritual, been raped on the same altar and everything, and then, being convinced that you're going to die, and then the the other women that are going to be part of the coven that you're going to be part of, like the mothers of darkness type people, come in to present, to save you, and basically to be like, hey, you just have to choose to be, and we're talking about like a 4-year-old here, so, so like, but you just have to choose, to basically like be, like the goddess has decided to save you, and you just have to choose to have part of your, self be a vessel for this goddess. So it feels like, like you're consenting to this kind of thing. So it's like on one level, it's just like creating that altar, that split in your mind, you're going through very similar, like kind of guided stuff, like to where, they're talking about you meeting the goddess, meeting the dark god that she's the consort of, all the things that characterize you as an individual, and the goddess that you're supposed to be like the vessel for, etc. And then you get, like freedom from death and like relief from pain and all this different shit, which is just like sealed up in this like one part basically, which then is going to be, pulled out repeatedly, and trained for the different roles that they're going to have and everything. But that essentially, and that's what I've always come down to with people, is like, all I know is my experiences, so I'm not going to say like, hey, this is how reality works, so I still come down to like not knowing when it comes to channeling, like whether there was like genuine entity interaction, you know what I mean, or it's that you are, I do believe in like the Akashic records, or like common, like this like timeless, vast knowledge consciousness, that might isn't necessarily, it's not like necessarily bad or good or whatever, Akashic record type stuff, like I was saying. But so it's like going into that space that while you're believing that you're a certain god or goddess with like a certain like goal in mind, basically, or if you're actually a channel for an actual outside entity, that's like where personally is like, I don't know. And I don't know if it really like, at least I don't know if it doesn't matter, at least when it comes to like the healing side of things for me. But to me, it doesn't really matter when it comes to like what the system, what this system is going to continue to perpetrate, because they definitely, obviously see value in it and see that they're getting enough of a benefit out of doing this shit, other than, just getting the rocks off, in a really sadistic way. So,
and that's by the way, those are not my poems. I write a lot of poetry, but I don't write shit like that, man. No way. But I have, so it's the same manual. I just have exactly, I think it ties in what you said. It's about that sexual magic. So let's see, the idea that all forms of left-hand path sexual sorcery lead to the creation of malignant, phantasmal, and etheric beings is an oversimplification and reeks of old world superstition. the sexual energy built up by the black magician through the practice of Cariza. If I don't know if you want that, Cariza, it's some kind of. Anyway, certainly is willfully directed and does in fact find a field of operation in the matrix which the dark sorcerer has created for it. The left-hand path view of this field of nature is that it is formed of the black magician's intent through long periods of development over time. The sorcerer does not regard the etheric as a passive field activity, as does our right-hand path counterparts, but instead understands it to be akin to the sorcerer's second field or night side, and that's that shadow, right? Night side, build up over time through the forces of will and intent. Black magicians exist within this field or matrix of their own construction, and all acts of magic take place therein are purposeful and directed. Black magicians, above all, are hoarders of energy. We are misers of our precious resources and would not simply tolerate the unintentional creation of entities who would wreak havoc in our lives. The idea is that the split seed breeds these creatures. If it does not have a home, find a home in the womb of a woman, is simply primitive and animistic, and it's metaphysics. Okay, it goes on. But so basically, they're talking about also creating archetypal, egregorical entities within a matrix field, right? So that may have been also what you connected with, right? So some of these are, they're putting you into their field, right? The field that they've built up. Maybe it's been built up over centuries, depending on how long the organization is, right? So I think, what you said, it could, I mean, and this looks like this is more, I mean, there's some kind of, like thought form entities, using archetypes to generate and store power to create, sort of semi-autonomous entities. But yeah, it really looks like they're using a lot of this, sex stuff to generate this energy.
So, Carrie spoke about how, on the other episodes, about how one of the forms that she was to embody is Hecate, and that's the triple goddess. And in the first poem, it was talking about Virgin, Mother, and Crone, and also when Carrie was utilized in the ceremonies, she would be, Diana or Artemis or Hecate, and as that role, then they would do the feast of the bonfire and have the animals and human flesh, and then there would be the orgy after, and they would utilize Carrie in their debauchery as that role. Like, she would be the goddess when that's happening, much like we see in Eyes Wide Shut. She would it's like they're raping the goddess, and it's like domination of that archetype, and that, those archetypes were, like you were saying, Hans, probably were formed over the ages. Hecate is this idea, this form of, in people's minds, and everyone is, like, not everyone, but people are taught this religious understanding of the gods and the goddesses. And so when they are thinking of the term Hecate, they'll be thinking of the triple goddess and those aspects of her. And so it kind of trains everybody into thinking that same thought that was created by the magicians beforehand. And the trauma split and the the manipulation of Carrie's imagination into believing that she is that role. That trauma split is the doorway which her consciousness enters into. Okay, I'm Diana now, or Artemis, or whatever. And for this ritual that they're utilizing, and then from later, she's able to access all those things through triggers and such from all of the programming. But really, though, like, what you both were getting at is that this is like the pre-written like ideas by the magicians that the victims are then put into, like, okay, you're going to be like this now, and yeah, like what I'm saying. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Yeah, no, it does. I know stuff is maybe not pleasant. I didn't know voodoo they have Atlantean mysteries in hoodoo. I didn't know that, but so this is just, I'll just read this real quick and just see what you think. So the gods or giants of chaos are not mere archetypes pigeonholed inside academic, theological, or mythical concepts. Beings like Loki carry within the mystery of Ignis Autor, the black flame that burns and destroys the creation and opens the doors of the black sun in order to reach the essence of the unmanifest. A causal expression such as this, I'm not sure what word that is. Okay, have connected with humanity to teach them how to go beyond anything cosmic finite towards experiencing what is chaotic infinity. Under my personal perception of dark alchemy, Loki possesses a symbolic level that gives practical knowledge and expertise on all levels of Azoth. And it goes into, thus this Lord of the Black Ooze, like, bro, I don't want to hang out with the Lord of the Black Ooze, man. Doesn't sound very fun. It's capitalized, holds within itself all the qualities of magical quintessence. Under his inspiration and guide, he showed me how to deal with the black arts. And okay, it goes on and on. But so that you see combination of some of these things as being potential forces, right? Even these could be energies or forces that are maybe brought into the shell or the holding container of the archetype and then finally brought into the individual person, right? And I think what's interesting is, I didn't know exactly what we're going to talk about, but I'm seeing how you talked about that trauma stuff. We're talking about the pseudo time, shadow time. So the shadow time also relates to the magician's grid, right? The energy grid that they build up, or the coven, or whatever, or the whole organization. So that, you know what I mean? So they, through these trauma points, they kind of push you into this space and probably also use your energy to make their whatever they're doing more powerful.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it was in one of the Imagination podcast episodes they did. I think it was even in the title. It was like the making of an occult battery, because that's kind of like how I felt like a lot of like the purpose of the rituals was. Like, there was like two sides to my ritual use. There was the, like, the blood related stuff, which is that, it's for like these kinds of like really specific rituals that they had in the covens and clients that they were working for. It's like, I had like a really specialized skill set that was trained in when it came to like anatomy and butchery, and even just having dissociative parts that could like be tools in that instance, like that. I had mentioned on many occasions that usually if that's the use that I was being used for, it was my most dissociated states. It's like we didn't even feel like we were more than like an inanimate object or something, like no different than the knife we were holding. That's the amount of like thought we felt like was there. So there wasn't a whole lot of like, I don't know how to describe it. Like that was almost like a more like practical side of the trafficking and stuff like that. Was like, okay, we're going to have these rituals. We need certain people trained with specific skill sets. And that's like part of it. More often the rituals were like primarily like sex based. They didn't always involve killing. More often it was animals than it was people. That were like usually very, much fewer, at least in the circles that I was in, comparatively to like the animal stuff. So that was a part of it. But generally, like, like the sex seems to be the thing that was never not part of a ritual. Like that really was like, it's like saying, the basically the manipulation of like, the sexual energy and the creative forces, like, is part of how they do programming. But it's also part of how it seems like what they feel like gives the rituals power, essentially. And that's kind of how I viewed it, is that the way I felt like I was used, often was because it was them, making me, perception wise or reality wise or whatever, a vessel, for that particular entity, like sacred whore, huntress, the uh, the channeling stuff was like a couple very specific rituals that always had to do with people. But like I said, most of the stuff had to do with this other part of the occult working, which was just, it's just basically sex magic based. But that was like where the exchange, they felt like came in, probably like one, that they're, generating all this energy as a whole during the ritual that's going to create, the access points or like the changes in general reality that they feel like they're after. But then for like the individuals themselves, it's like Sean had mentioned, it's like on a certain level, to some of them, the appeal is going to be like, oh, I'm like dominating a goddess or something like that, and that's like, but really a lot of it is more, it's like a little bit more nuanced than that, because it's more that like, that because I'm like a vessel for a goddess that's like a consort to the dark god, who's ultimately who they think is like much more, I don't know, powerful or whatever. Like in their own minds, that's what they're all trying to achieve, is themselves being that dark god, essentially, you know what I mean? Like, so if we look at it from not what was going on in like their survivor's mind or what they're hoping to achieve in the general world, if we look at each of these individual black magicians or whatever the crap you want to call it, these coven members that are there performing the ritual, it's like the ritual itself, like I'm a vessel that has this attachment that they feel like now, because they're raping me, but it's seen by that part and them, that's consensual, even though it can't be consensual because I'm a minor. But regardless, the point is that I like that for that time period, they in their mind, are also enacting that they themselves are the dark god. That's ultimately like what all of these psychopaths and narcissists want, is that they want to feel like, that all powerful king of their kingdom, you know what I mean? But more so, to be like literally a god, themselves basically. So it's like, if they have this belief system and they have this belief that, there's these specific, child prostitutes essentially that have been attached with these entities, and by having sex, with them, then it's like them getting to play like they're the dark god. Like that, I think, is a large part of it for them in their own, psyche and in their own whatever, like because like that's the kind of stuff, like it was very repetitive, like year after year. It's like a lot of like based on like ritual dates and stuff. But that's a lot of also what I talked about too, is that when we moved to Tucson and I had kind of like graduated or whatever, is kind of how it was always put to me, into like the roles I was going to have for like the rest of my, slavery essentially with my handlers and stuff like that, is that was like part of like my like running gig or something, is that like my dad's boss was a hand surgeon in the area, John Madden, and he was like head of a local cult, basically him and his girlfriend essentially. And so in between rituals, like they saw themselves as like almost like me as like the third in their relationship essentially, where like he was continuing to in between rituals feel like he was like a priest, and and that he would have these like it's like trafficking events that I would be brought to his house for, but that for him it was almost his own small magical working type shit, that was all part of like essentially feeling like I had some sort of like not power like in and of myself, but that I was like connected as like a channel to a specific power, to a specific archetype, entity, whatever, that they then felt like they could, by raping me, essentially felt like they could then, access and, put to whatever end that they wanted.
And you mentioned ritual dates as well. They're using the charged battery on certain times of the year, which come around with the sun. So those dates are also charged, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And like I said, I got all these texts. There's all these there's actual now rituals like invoke Lilith. So I invoke Lilith. No, I'm just kidding.
Not
I
today,
can
please.
but let's try it. And there's a bunch of other goddesses, but the rituals. But I found this is what's interesting. Again, this is some kind of manual, whatever. This talks about just what you said, etheric feeding. So the practice of psychic vampirism is well known in most systems of magic. The vampire being a person who unknowingly or intentionally draws from the life force of those around her. It's HIR, I don't know if that means something. Her, either to sustain themselves or in some instances to subjugate them, to have them submit to their will. It is this auric energy or life force which these individuals siphon off their victims, causing lethargy and or reducing their natural resistance, both physical and spiritual. Any competent musician who is proficient in the visualization and directing of energies can use this if desired to perform acts of vampirism. Drawing in chi from others, it is possible by the positive perception and manipulation of one's own energy field to assess and retain these energies. So it goes on, and basically telling restore their own energy without undue physical or mental stress. While drawing the auric energy of others can empower one, providing extra power for the individual, it is the subtler emanations that are more used to the vampire magician to replenish her only extended or added. I don't know, there's this HIR, this pronoun, it obviously means something, but added to her own empower ritual. Sexual techniques used by many magical groups or individuals are no longer occult in the true sense of the word. And the use of these by a magician would forego the need of any so-called vampiric methods, as it is in the creation exchange of vibrations originated by these acts which are used to vitalize the ritual enacted. The following techniques are the sole province of the vampire musician who, working alone, wishes to access these energies for their own use. So it goes through all these techniques: astral rape, succubi and incubi. Um, it goes on and on. So these are all just techniques, familiars, chakra drinking. It goes through all these ways of actual psychic vampirism, including the ritual stuff. That sounds to, man, this stuff is pretty far out. Wow. Okay, I think I'm just not going to read some of this. I'm going to not look at this now.
But
But yeah,
that's
this is,
access through the sex magic and the, those type
well,
of
well,
process.
not just sex magic. It looks like, I mean, you can do, you install um, either some type of programming or parameters in somebody. You have these points, and these also create etheric or astral energy harvesting, nodes, you could say. You know what I mean? I think it's, and the ritual can make that more powerful, but it can be done even just by an individual. That's why I thought of that with that guy you mentioned, that doctor. God, I'm so, Carrie, so horrible what you went through. Let me, if you want to respond to what I just said, but I mean, how prevalent is this, like in the world or in America? I mean, how much is this going on, do you think?
So first, I just wanted to comment uh on like the etheric like harvesting, because I think that's one thing that is very common in a lot of survivors' experiences, especially if they've gone through ritual or occult abuse, is like feeling like they have like that they're abusers who essentially have a lot of times played the role of like the dark magician in their life, in reality, but also in like, non-physical space in their mind and everything like that, is that, that there's this interpretation, this common feeling, that that's a lot of like what you are having to like sever as part of healing, is like this idea that this is something that they are conscious of, maybe some of them not conscious of it. It's just something that naturally happens because of what they're doing. But I think a lot of people, if you're dealing with like the level of like trauma programming that I was, you are dealing with people that have this kind of occult leaning and knowledge and stuff like that, and that is like a lot of, that this feeling, almost like, for me, it's like if I had to visualize it, it was almost like you have your etheric field, and there was almost these like holes pierced in it, like that had like funnels almost like attached to, like the different people that had you know, especially if they had intentionally tried to have some sort of like feeling like a connection of like power over you, but then also that they're like feeding off of you in one way or another, you know. So I just wanted to comment on that, is that is like a really common experience, it sounds like, in like the survivor community and stuff like that, is this sense, you know, that you know, and it's a lot of what keeps programming intact long past being around the abusers and stuff too, is like it's something that doesn't feel like is it affected by proximity or time or, you know, or space or anything like that, that, you know, the abusers could be on the other side of the country, but there's still the perception that they're right there. And that's going to be partially because of interjects and parts, but I think a lot of it is also going to be because of these like etheric ties that have been created, you know. And until you're conscious of it enough, you know, and healing those wounds, you know, then it's not something that, you know, you realize is a huge part of what holds you back in healing, you know, and keeps a lot of the programming in place and stuff like that. So but yeah, and then when it comes to like the prevalence of this, like that's another thing that I say before. I'm like, I'm not really sure, you know, like if it's, you know, every city of a certain size or specific cult towns, you know what I mean? Like it's something realistically that's happening all over the world and everything. And at this point, you know, especially since, you know, World War II, there's been like this like common sharing of like these practices, I think, across people that have the same inclinations, you know, basically all over the world. You know, it's like a network of this stuff. But that's a lot of what I typically, you know, try to reiterate with people, like especially if I'm just like talking to people about my trafficking experiences from like the organized crime side of things, you know, and not even getting into like any of the occult abuse like at all, you know, is that, you know, from my experience, if I were to just look at like just the trauma stuff and just the, you know, the trauma-based mind control and like the purposeful abuse of children in these programs, like from what I saw, it was like an assembly line, you know, that like that was my perception, is that like, you know, if you have a trauma or like a setting, basically, like for me, like I had told, you know, the Washington DC event, for example, was just like I was the star of the show there, you know what I mean? Like that was like, that whole event was like meant to, you know, create the circumstances that they felt was going to create like the channel out of like me specifically. And it was a programming event, you know, and then a ritual event for them, you know, so it's all these different things on these different levels. But then it's like when I moved to Texas and I was dealing with a lot more of like the more organized like medical and military abuse, for example, is like at that point when it came to like my shock and awe event that they're going to base a lot of programming on after that, you know, it was several days being like spent in like what you would see as a traditional like horror movie like bunker, you know what I mean, and like going through all these very traumatic things. But there was, you know, there were several other kids there at the time, you know. It's like it wasn't, we're not talking about just like one 4-year-old like in this instance, you know, we're talking about, you know, like 5 or 6, you know, with maybe 1 or 2 of them being plants that were there to like role model a certain reaction to certain situations. And then, you know, you have horrible things being shown to you or whatever, you know, like the kids will be dealing with like sexual abuse or, you know, all the typical stuff that you hear about with, you know, you know, being cold, not having food, you know, being in isolation, you know, you're dealing with like kids that are a lot of times away from their parents for the first time, you know, so it's like, and, you know, and being told that you're never going to see the sun again, you know, it's pretty much everything, you know, you can imagine. But then it's like, you know, if you're, you know, killing a kid in front of them as like you're anchoring shock and awe trauma stuff, you know, like one was burned to death and one was torn apart by dogs, essentially, that it's like, it's creating this, you know, now you got this foundational trauma for 5 kids that are going to be, you know, then used later on, essentially in matter of a couple of days. And then who knows how much downtime there is between the next batch coming in and the next batch coming in. You know what I mean? It could be like, oh, like we have a couple groups a year. It could be like, oh, we have 20 a year. It could be we have 30. You know, like that to me is like where it, like understanding the overall like scope or scale of these things is very difficult for me to like know, other than knowing that it's a lot more than a lot of people would like to believe, you know, because of the very like systematized factory like conveyor belt type feeling that a lot of the training, the trauma stuff really had to it, you know. And it's just like knowing, like if I were to look at like the bunker that I was spending time at when I was in Texas, like how infinitely vast this underground world can be in a physical sense too, that people really can't quite conceptualize, you know what I mean, when it comes to just understanding, like not even from like, okay, like we're dealing with people having bad intentions in their thoughts and networking above ground and getting caught or not caught, but that there's like, you know, that's a lot of what a lot of survivors talk about, is like the vast networks that we actually have of this very parallel reality that exists below ground essentially, but that is almost like a literal hell realm, because there is no, there, it is ruled by psychopaths and there is no oversight, you know what I mean, and it is literally like, you know, like human farming essentially. You know, that it's like at that point it's like knowing like numbers, it's you know, I don't like to give them too much power, because I think that's a lot of like the psyop of like this culture creation, is like this idea that even if people wake up to the control structure, that they're going to feel powerless, because they're going to feel like, oh my god, like these people have so much resources and so much shit like that. So on a certain level I don't want to like overplay it, but on another level I want to also be like, the reality that I saw is that, you know, it is, you know, much larger essentially when we talk about the prevalence of this, and like how integrated it is into all of our different, you know, infrastructure in the world, you know, that it's, you know, it's a huge problem. But that's also why it's, you know, finally getting noticed on a larger scale, is because it is so ubiquitous that, you know, there is enough of a paper trail once people start looking into it to actually really start uncovering the, you know, how vast this really is, you know.
You know, Carrie, you know what? Maybe I'll invite you on my show to talk about some of the stuff, because yeah, I mean, what you said, that's exactly what it is. So they have, there'll be a piercing through, you know, you say, you know, biofield, energetic body. These are entry points. The difficult thing, I haven't talked about personal stuff, but that basically when something is coming at a much higher plane of consciousness, it can affect everything below it. You know what I mean? So it's like you look at, thoughts, this, that, it takes a long time to say what is coming in from outside, what is just being triggered inside of me that is just running as a system that has been installed, what is directly coming in. And the thing is that imprinting, because you can extract energy, but it can also insert energy, right, at the same time. And so that's very, very difficult. And actually encountering the reality of that can be very disturbing for people. It's not like something, in a Hollywood movie, but it is absolutely real. And it's very, I think you have to get to a certain point where you have enough clarity in your own mind, enough groundedness that you're not afflicted by things that are sent, and you're able to discern, right, what is, what is actually happening, where is it coming from, how is it happening, what, you know what I mean? Because if you get too much caught up in, especially like emotional things or whatever, then you just really, it's horribly brutal. But I don't know if that makes sense to you, but yeah, that's exactly. I mean, it's so brutal, man. It's not fun, but I guess without getting the clarity, and then also, I mean, the thought streams. I think one thing is that there's defensive mechanisms installed to prevent you from recognizing that. As you get closer to a certain thing, this can happen. And you have to be able to get through these things, because basically all these things are going to knock you back into sort of a feedback loop in yourself, right? Like almost like, you know what I mean? Like a ball but you just got to push through. And then it's like, oh man, Okay. And just being able to be calm and recognize it and not, because I think just to realize what your whole consciousness can be externally governed sometimes, right? You know what I mean? All your sensory organs, you know what I mean? This is not, it's not fun, but I think you get through it. But I'd like to just hear a little bit more about that. Does that make sense? What I
Yeah.
said based on my experience?
Yeah. No, I mean, I would definitely say that that's the case. And it's interesting because I feel like, at least from my experience, it seems like, especially like initially in healing, survivors fall into either camp 100%, like where they feel like they either have the perception of, the outside stuff, and then they attribute all of the things that are happening in their system to outside stuff. And I think those people tend to initially like run to, I got demons, and they run to religion, and they really are like convinced that like everything that's creating the turmoil in their life is coming from outside influences, and they have this idea that they can just, forgive or pray away or just, do these different, if we look at the New Age movement, people also go spiritual materialists there, they're looking for crystals and they're looking for different healing, these different things to like essentially like banish what they feel are like outside things that are affecting them, and then I feel like the other half, or I don't know if it's half, but the other sector of people, which is actually where I fell into, is more like super logical to where they don't want to believe in that other thing being the case, in which case, like, even though there are outside things that are coming in, like, you don't want to give it credence. So that's part of like your own like way of like, okay, like I have control. I can, like, this is all just parts of my mind that I can just heal through a lot of therapy and a lot of, different stuff like this, and when in reality it is both, that was my experience. I had to get to a certain point of healing, of recognizing the occult abuse and the spiritual abuse to understand that yes, that there was a lot that was, like you had said, was, these programming loops, these thought loops that get triggered by like, or triggering like interjects of like your abusers, where it's all these internalized stuff from your abuser that's just a construct of your own mind. It's not literally your abuser having access to you, you know what I mean? But it, perception wise, like that's, the loop that you get caught in everything like that. But that in reality it is both, is like yeah, like a certain amount of the, most, in my experience, most of the stuff that you're going to have to deal with internally as a survivor is going to be interjected material and identities and stuff like that that came from the abuse, and is not something that's like outside entity. But if you did go through occult abuse, you most likely will also also have some of this, because of the people you were dealing with, because of the stuff, particular stuff that you went through, and the spiritual abuse that it is both. And it takes a lot to recognize where things are something that's coming internally that you have to heal, and where something is like an external attachment, or like doorways, like how I've always seen it is like doorways that get opened into your psyche for this, this outside area. And that it's like, and you have to consciously be aware that it's there, and then choose to, shut it, or, heal the part that feels like they need to keep it open, usually because they identify as that same entity. So you have to heal that part and that initial trauma to be able to get them to recognize that they don't have to play that role anymore, and that they can choose to like revoke consent and shut that door, basically, so that's, and so yeah, a lot of that I felt like was, is pretty spot on to how I recognize stuff. And I really think like it's part of why meditation is a big part of my my channel. I focus on journaling and different healing modalities, but meditation is one thing I probably haven't posted quite as much on my channel about, but it, for me, was very foundational to my healing. Was me getting sober first, and then into the meditation, in addition to all the therapy and shit that I was doing. But it really was like foundational, because it allows, to me, a spiritual connection is like to good, you know what I mean? To natural law and to good and to morality is fundamental for any healing, you know. But number two, you need to be able to start like parsing out what's going on in your head. And when you are so caught up in the emotion and the trauma and the PTSD and stuff like that, that's really hard to do, especially in early on in healing, especially if you're just recently starting to like come to terms with trauma memories that that you hadn't dealt with for most of like your life and everything. But it's, so what you need is distance, you know, to be able to learn to become the observer, you know, and everything, like, and actually, rather than these programs continue to run on like various levels of like consciousness and stuff like that, is to be able to start like really parsing out like where the reactions that you're, what emotions you're going through, what reactions you're having are like appropriate to your current life, and then what are things that are being triggered from the past, and starting to recognize like, okay, like the only way you heal from these traumas, and part of like why I can talk about them at this point in my healing in a very like blunt way, it's something that my detractors, are always gonna, people that don't understand dissociation are always gonna have an issue with, is the fact that I can smile, that I can laugh, that I can talk about these horrible fucked up things, you know what I mean, with like out like breaking down and crying. And I'm like, dude, would you guys want to watch that? Would you guys want to watch that? No one would understand anything I was saying if you were hearing me in like a trauma state, you know what I mean? So it is what it is. But when it comes down to it, being able to be an observer and a narrator of these kinds of things, be able to use the dissociation that was used against me as a kid as something that I can now use to like to heal, and to create that space to be able to like process really horrible, like horrific things. It's not easy. It's not a pretty process. It's very messy and very ugly, and like there's so much energy that goes into it. But I always tell survivors, I'm like, as much energy goes into healing, you have to understand like every single day that you don't heal those memories, you're devoting so much of your energy internally to keeping things suppressed, and that's like where, it's like, it is that trade-off. And I think that's a lot of the programming, and why I viewed them as like darts, or these entryways, these different things that they really want with these highly programmed individuals and everything, is feeling like they have their own entrances and insight, but feeling so certain that they have created in the person themselves enough of like a carbon copy of what they want, that it's almost like like cogs of a machine or a clock working together, that it's like it's a self-perpetuating system, essentially, of control. So like you're saying, it's like going down one road and then triggering something, and then having this other thing triggered. That's those chains, programming chains, or some survivors call them loops, are like so common. And that's pretty much how like you stay stuck, essentially, in with like both your mind, parts of your mind being the prisoners, and parts of your mind being the prison guard, essentially, is because they have all of these like different mechanisms that they've implanted as like fail safes. So if one part starts learning information they're not supposed to, you have all these other obstacles that are going to then be triggered and come up. So I don't know if that like fully pertained to like what you were asking, but
Yeah, no, that's pretty much, I mean, one of the things, if you haven't experienced it, it's kind of hard to describe it, right? For other people to connect with it. But I mean, I just say one thing, meditation, though, I really went overboard with that. This one thing, it can be very good, but you can also, there's a little bit of risk with just meditation at some points, you know what I mean? So just that, because if you already have sort of these vulnerabilities, you can, if you're not very clear, right? If you want to make sure that you are actually absolutely present, right? And there's basically only two basic real forms of meditation. The one is, prataka's total concentration on one object, whether it's a candle flame or this or that, and then full, complete, absolutely relaxed, pure open awareness, pure open attention, no matter what's arising, just complete openness, complete relaxation, absolute presence. These are basically the two things. I mean, but anyways, I mean, the difficulty, because to believe that, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, all I was going to comment on with the meditation is like in my experience, and I learned it mainly through like the Tibetan Buddhist practice and stuff. You usually have shamatha first, like intentionally for this reason, basically, is that you start with like you have to start with a trained mind essentially before you go after that second state, essentially, that of like complete openness and awareness. That you start with the practice of single pointed focus. A lot of times you can use breath. That's kind of has always been like the standard thing, is like being able to focus on like maybe the physical sensation of air entering and leaving your nose, because really it's like our minds are so untamed and all over the place, that even just doing that for like more than a couple breaths is more than most people can handle. So that kind of, for me, has always been part of like why it is foundational. Because if I were to just go for that state of complete relaxation, that's, to me, feels akin to hypnosis, or self-hypnosis, like the state of being being completely open and completely imprintable and stuff like that. So if you're not able to maintain your presence and your awareness to be able to maintain that objective, observer standpoint, then it's, that's where you're going to kind of run into issues, like you're saying, because especially if you already have these doorways open or something like that, if you just go straight for like, hey, I'm just trying to like access that space that's that's completely open and everything, like, yeah, you can, in my experience, too, you could definitely run into some issues, but if you start first with like, working out that muscle, of training your brain to where you can stay present, 100% in the moment with that focus, and then you start, working on having that broader view and being able to like sit with that, but then have that expansive awareness of like, for me, I've always practiced it just for like myself and what's going on internally. I know a lot of people, sometimes they are into the idea of like astral projection or different shit, and and they want to be able to like expand their consciousness beyond like outside of their body. But for me, and the way I always recommend it for survivors, is like, you work on the breath first and be able to maintain presence, and then once you have that, you are able to start being the observer of the thoughts and emotions that are just running through your head as you're sitting in that, and not choosing to like push them away to where you're like, I need to be in this blank state, because that doesn't really do anything for anyone, but being able to be like, okay, like, let me see what things are coming up, and like when you can have the non-attached vision, the like perception of it is a lot of times where you can start then, in my experience, really untangling the threads and everything, because, the internal landscape of a lot of survivors is one of like a constant internal battle, and like arguments and stuff like that, because a lot of these parts, they have very different experiences and they don't see eye to eye, you know what I mean? So it's like people's internal critic, which is a normal thing, to have internal critic or a few based off of like influences or people in their life, and it's like, take that times like 10 or something, or like most people can still recognize, that, okay, this is like me talking to myself, whereas this experience with a survivor is that you have all of these different parts, and they wholeheartedly believe that they have, different identities essentially, than each other, and are, and it's like having a room full of fucking Hillary and Trump supporters or something, and you're like, guys, can't you just get along? You know what I mean? Versus if, but that's what you have to do, is like, you have to be able to be the person that's like witnessing, like the healing part is the part, that is choosing to like, to witness and not engage, either side, but essentially just step back and view the argument,
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I just mentioned that because, some of that, they have like the Dzogchen or some of these other types of things, that you can, if you haven't established very clear consciousness and you even know what your own consciousness is, that's the thing. When are you actually conscious, right? To really just develop that at all times, you can get teleported into different realms. I mean, you can go, I mean, you can be totally outside of your body. You can go into the past, present, future, and it's going to be completely vivid. You won't even remember, me not remember when you get done. Yeah, so that's good, you know, just to take the discipline of the training and things like astral projection, man. I just think really, at least in this day and age, it's really best to avoid all these things, you know. I mean, really, because you don't, I mean, this is it's kind of a very hyper culture, right? With all these things going on and a lot of people playing around and some people that have mastered these things, and also employment of electronic technology can also impact or influence these things, right? Um,
Yeah.
and that, you know, one thing that may be helpful, I think is if you're familiar. So I think one of the best things is developing, you know, the kinesthetic awareness, the somiosensory embodied presence of your body as it is in space, in the whole field of what's arising around the body as it is. And your mind actually, this is your body's there before your mind comes to it, right? But then if you could develop that, then you can develop, there's, especially for dissolving like trauma stuff, you know, if you remember the soul chakras. So the soul chakra is 16 inches above the head here, and then 16 inches below your feet. These are the soul chakras, right? And if you can start to connect with those, starting with very direct, clear, immediate, you know, your body in space and movement, right? Not even necessarily sensation, but that soul chakra, these soul chakras, if you can start to access that, you don't necessarily have to go through unwinding all the traumas, right? You create a space where they kind of dissolve of themselves, right? So that at least to a certain degree, you don't have to relive every single memory and do this stuff. You can actually, and even in a sense, you're still present. You're just present in a very different way, right? So it's right here, this one, and it's there, right? If you can access it, so you're right there at you know, right at the borderline of this sort of etheric energy body, a little bit above, and right there. That's a great to connect with that. And when you actually catch it, and that you have a whole different perspective, and many things they're just gone because there's no more ground for them, right? It's like you have a house filled with assholes, you just blow the house up. The asshole, well, it's a bad metaphor, but you blow the house up, they're gone. You don't even have to go through and meet them all and walk through the house and talk to them. It's gone. The structure, there's no ground for the structure, right? I don't know if that, because to me, at least, I feel that with like, especially like trauma stuff, like there's such an emphasis in like psychotherapy and therapy, just go through it, relive it, go through it. Some things I don't, if you can look at the actual how is it operating energetically? How is it operating in the thresholds or gates of awareness? How's it operating in the nervous system? Right? What is it actually doing as a physical process, right? Which is going to be outside of your normal consciousness. That's the thing, right? So I can keep going on this, but you know, you've about the reticular activating system. So that's part of the brain that basically filters everything you perceive. Right. So a lot of these things will be happening on the thresholds or margins. When I mentioned that sort of kinesthetic state, you can actually step outside the normal framing of consciousness. So anything programmed within it, it's like I mean, you know, you can shift it, right? You can watch a movie, you'll shift you know, what you're perceiving, but it's a filtration mechanism of what you're going to notice around you. What is your reality? But it's something that is flexible, it is pliable. You can step outside that, and a lot of these, because if you can get to the actual operational structures on the, you know, neurophysiological level, then you can dissolve it without having to go into the content. Unless you want to go in the content, that's up to, you know, up to you. So
Wow.
Um, I guess I might disagree with you there. And only because like, so to me, it's like, I think of someone early in healing that's like hearing this and like, they're like, thank God I don't have, you know what I mean? Like that, but it's like, so for persecutor parts, these are parts of like of ourselves that were like Stockholm syndromed into like allying with like the beliefs and the identities of our abusers, but there's still ultimately a broken off child part that would not have chosen, you know, they were put into this position where they were forced to choose that as survival, but they would have not chosen that. So in my experience, and that's what I was saying, like, you know, majority of these negative influences in a survivor's life are not going to be outside influences. They are going to be internal child parts that have been convinced to play the roles of abusers internally, basically. But in my experience, all of those parts are redeemable if you have like the time and the will, and basically that's part of what you're doing is for each of these individual parts you're blowing up their house. You know what I mean? Like you're basically like shedding the light of reality and presence, and like like taking all the lies and manipulation that trauma was created for, and you're really shining the light on it and truth, and bringing in your spiritual path. For me it's like having Buddhism, having this ability to like understand the bigger perspective of things. Like a lot of these things are the things that like need to be brought, skills, different things that need to be brought to these child parts. They need to be rescued from their memories, and then they themselves are no longer the assholes in the house. You know what I mean? Like suddenly they're an ally, basically. The ones that would say are assholes in the house are 100% the outside influences, which I do feel like also exist, and that is what happens for them in the instance that you heal that traumatized part. That's what happens is that that doorway, that house that they were living inside of that survivor has just been it's just been demolished. It's like all of these this really intense emotional energy and all these really fucked up self-conceptions that they're evil or that they belong with demons or all this different crap that provided that entity space in the survivor's head and psyche, and everything like that is essentially it's taken away as soon as you heal the part. So that's the only reason, like I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you in general. You know what I mean? Because I really feel like the mechanism you're talking about is the mechanism that really is what happens. But in my experience, like there is no, like this is the kind of trauma you're talking about, there is no sidestepping reliving stuff, with the caveat being that it doesn't have to be every single time. So basically, like if I have a part that was created for a specific ritual where it's the same the same trauma that is being reenacted year after year, and it's the same part that's being triggered and called out and is holding on to this trauma, like to heal that part, in my experience, I do not need to like relive every single ritual event. It's more about you usually do have to process the initial event, that point of the initial split, the thing that created the circumstances that created that identity and that beliefs, that self-conception, and created the dissociative pocket, that we're talking about. You need to process that, and you may need to process, like let's say if I'm talking about 10 different events, that were roughly the same, there might be one or two there's going to be the initial one, and there might be one or two in that timeline of ones that were particularly bad for one reason or another. Like in my experience, it's like, okay, I've been to this ritual year after year, but this year they, most of the time it was like a Sam Hain type one. Most of the time it's like a male immigrant or something that they're burning at the stake. But this time they're like, yay, we happen to get a mother and baby, so it's the same event, but they're essentially, it's like there's like an added level of, emotional trauma that is, so for, I give that as an example to where it's like, yeah, that's kind of like where I'm like, I'm pretty much agreeing with you, that yeah, you don't have to like literally relive every single, it's like if that was the case, I don't think anyone would really heal, especially if you're dealing with like people that are dealing with like trauma throughout their lives and everything. But on another level, it's like, yeah, you're gonna have to heal the parts. And in my experience, like I just don't ever want to sell this idea to people, because it kind of comes back to me like with like the the spiritual materialism, the demon type of thing, where you can be like, okay, there's something that you can do to sidestep stuff, because what's happening, what is going to be felt by the parts in that person when they're attempting that is that they're not worth saving. that basically that, that they really are not, don't really have a place in this survivor's current reality, you know what I mean? And a lot of parts, even if we're looking at like the asshole ones, that's a lot of why they stay allied to the abusers, is because they are watching from the subconscious and they're aware that everything that they were forced to do and then became allied with, and the loyalties and loves that they had for people that were essentially, they understand now, are evil. Now you have to essentially, by choosing to step into the light, you're choosing to basically, like, it's almost like turning yourself into the cops or something. It's like, oh my god, now all of a sudden, I'm choosing to try and heal with parts that are just going to look at me as this complete monster and everything like that. So to me, like, that's kind of the, like, very foundational to survivors making any progress at all in healing, is that non-judgmental objectivity that we have to try and maintain. We have to be the reparenting. And if like a kid was traumatized and came to us with stuff, like, we wouldn't be like, shame on you for crying. You know what I mean? Like, shame on you for being a bully because you've been abused for like 2 decades or something. We would just be like, okay, like, I understand this happened, and now we have to start to, like, we have to start to look at it like that. So but the general concept of what you're saying, like exploding that house, exploding that grounds, it is part of why healing gains momentum, is because as you start, if you can even start to heal one abuser allied part, it very quickly starts eroding the ground that all of them are, built on, to where it gains momentum in healing, to where more and more parts that were, quote unquote assholes or evil or something like that, are witnessing parts that they saw as like them, but now are, hey, now they're part of the system, and now they're not burdened by this trauma, and now they're playing these roles where they're able to be out in the body and enjoying themselves, as opposed to feeling like they're a slave or a tool for like really horrible things. So you will start, as you build up the ground, of presence and awareness, it is true that it'll slowly erode the ground that all of the really negative programming is built on.
So that was my trauma hack failed. No, but the thing is, there goes
connecting to the top chakra.
The soul chakra is outside of the body.
But that sounds like, that sounds like what she was saying, to connect the pieces with the light of morality and love, right?
Yeah. Well, that's really like, this is actually finding the part of you that is directly connected with God, with the creator, that that is outside of this physical embodiment, right? It is much above that. That being said, I just threw it out there. I think you're probably, you're correct. I do think though, what I mean is that I think a lot, not you, right? Not what you're talking about, but I think there are a lot of people that I hear, like, I have this trauma, I have that trauma, and they keep reliving an incident in their daily life. My husband did this to me, and it's like 4 years, you're still complaining about it, and you're choosing to carry this with you. You can't do this. Is much, much deeper what you're talking about. And I think also what you're saying is that these are parts of you don't want to injure yourself any further, right? You want to be able to integrate, you want to bring what's back, right? You don't want to just chop everything away and just end up, void. And then the other thing, with the external, if, seeing everything externalized, it can actually create a state of almost terror, right? I mean, because then you can become very, very lost, right? But then again, not recognizing that. And I think, like I said, the external can even just be a little bit of an energetic charge, like just a zap. It doesn't have to be a huge thing, but if, as I mentioned, if that hits and starts getting things going within yourself, right, then suddenly you are running that or carrying that. So I think you're probably correct on that. I was just hoping you just, okay, I'm good. Yeah.
No, to be honest, like, to be honest, like, I mean, if there was something like that for survivors, then I can't imagine a single survivor that wouldn't love to have that as an option, But I think kind of what you're saying, like, the mechanism is accurate. It's just that you have to do it in like 100 different iterations when it comes to someone that's dealing with like, really intense dissociative identity disorder and occult abuse and stuff. Like you're saying, if it's stuff that's happened, we're not talking developmentally in childhood, it maybe some things, you know what I mean? But, like you were saying, like different traumas in your life that where people are stuck in a story or something. Yeah, I think that sounds like a really valid thing because, that is a lot of, of healing. A lot of times is you need to, have that outside perspective of like why you're experiencing what you're experiencing and stuff. And part of what I think is interesting too is I feel like on a certain level that is kind of like where, like what brought me to, more closure in my own healing, was this ability to recognize that through some near-death experiences throughout my life, that, and then having some understanding of like where my soul was at prior to being born in this life, essentially, like understanding that, if I were to zoom out, that, that you understand that there's like a bigger, there's like a bigger role of consent that's being played, in this life and everything. And to where it was, it's a lot of what took away a lot of like resentment I had towards myself, or just a lot of things about, the things I had been able, gone through, the things I've been forced to participate in, like all of that stuff, you're angry with God, but then it's like, I felt like through zooming out and having the perspective of like multiple lives, understood how this was a life that I willingly chose for many different reasons, essentially, and that on a certain level, dissociation is like God's gift to us, is like, if we didn't have it, then kids would not be able to survive, these kind of traumas. Somebody would argue that it'd be better if they didn't, like there's many kids that I saw that didn't, but it's like, it allows, it allows the child to have a more normal life, because they are able to put these instances into a different place, in their mind, into the etheric field, whatever, you want to say. So it's like, it's something that is like really, is like a huge part of like how it feels like, like God, the universe has created circumstances where if the abuse is inevitable, how is it that we create the circumstances where it's going to do the least amount of damage possible, you know what I mean? But then also understanding that part of healing is not that these things are going to be permanently dissociated, but that at a certain point, things will start coming up for you to process, essentially, when you're in a place that you can handle it, which you couldn't when you were a child and you had no ability to get out of these circumstances. And everything. But so, I mean, I think it's a good trauma hack. I would also be interested to hear more about, like I said, just not a great, I wouldn't want survivors to see it as a shortcut, but I think it is something that sounds like a really valid technique, for people to get perspective and to get out of these like thought, emotional loops that keep people stuck for many years, But the reason I wanted to ask about it too is because that's one thing that I think Sean had mentioned that he had noticed was like a similarity between like the structure diagrams that I had, we had been trying to share last episode, and the things that you had talked about was that like that part of the anchor points or whatever for like my particular system, grid structure essentially was based around like the chakras, the what I see is like, the very like, Hindu based, but is kind of like a more modern, like new age iteration that we have that people generally, understand, nowadays with like, the 7 chakras essentially, but that in the programming I experienced, a lot of times it felt like that there was an additional one that was below the root chakra essentially. And that's kind of like where a lot of like, if you were to say like the demonic anchor points or whatever, like that's where those things were anchored, you know, to the point also where like that's a lot of what I was taught and was really similar to, you know, the Sephiroth and the oh my god, it's totally spacing Qliphoth.
Yes.
Is that it? Yeah.
Yes.
So that basically that was the whole mechanism for how my system structure changed from our daytime, day-to-day persona to the cult nighttime persona. Essentially, is that the whole system would invert, you know, would flip essentially to where it then that lower chakra basically like, you know, was now like the quote unquote is top chakra, you know, the top chakra of the cult parts, you know, so like the whole thing was essentially flipped upside down when there was that overall switch from like a night persona and night and or daytime, you know, persona and roles into the nighttime occult or like, you know, military side of stuff.
And that's the Lilith is the doorway, and Lilith is the lowest chakra, or the lowest like Sephiroth or whatever, where the two trees meet. That's like the point of inversion. And Lilith is the dark goddess, and she's the mother goddess of all the demons, right? So that's the same as like Magna Mater of Cybele and shit, but it's like the inversion of that. It's very interesting. And uh Laura Worley, I think, she talked about how she talks about Mothers of Darkness, and she also talks about the internal structures of most of these uh, cult programmed DID victims is the Kabbalah tree. And they're even like she as a child, her bones were broken, and they told her that they were implanting a tree, like they're actually putting it in her physical body. And now she's saying they have, you know, digital and mechanical or digital types of ways of implanting it now, where they don't have to break the bones or whatnot. But still,
Yeah,
like
it's advanced VR plus LSD and like, you know, so if I were
Right.
just look at what I went through in like the 90s, you know, it's like, yeah, it's like I'm younger than Laura Worley, but you know, it's still the same thing. It's like different techniques to achieve the same stuff, you know, where you're, you know, they're, you know, if they can make things less damaging, then that's always going to be
Right.
preferred, especially if you're going to be used repeatedly. There's less downtime, etc.
And Hans was saying in our Qliphoth episodes, the earlier ones, about how the Kabbalah tree and the Qliphoth tree are the same tree at the same time, right, Hans? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, so that's you know, we look. That's why I kind of read that. Oh, thank you, Carrie, for sharing all that. I'll work on my. You know, I just feel like, you know, we want to be able to have the best possible lives we can, right? Anything, and I think there's necessary suffering, there's unnecessary suffering. Like anything that can be cleared and avoided. But you know, certain things that take time, right? You have to do it in a gradual way. You have to be gentle. You can't just, you know, do your hack. But yeah, so the Qliphoth, basically you can have the Qliphoth. You know, when I read that poem by whoever occultist, they're talking about the space between being and nothingness, between good and evil, right? So this, as you mentioned, like flipping to that night side, it's almost like the inversion, the polarity, and also catching that space and the tension. And you know, the chakras, I mean, there's many more than 7 chakras, and there are lower chakras. You know, there's like, you know, multiple chakras above the heart. You know, in the feet have very powerful chakras. You know, your feet, your hands. I mean, there's hundreds of chakras actually, but these lower chakras, and that actually you create almost like the chakras become inverted too, right? They become, you know what I mean? You change the rotation. It inverts the rotation of the energies basically. I'll just, I just, if you don't mind, I'll just read a little bit of this to come back to the Qliphoth. I'm just seeing all these occultists, the black flame, black ooze, like Why the? I don't swear. Why the fuck would you want to do that, man? You know, why would you want to hurt people? I mean, why would you want to feed off people? I don't know. I don't understand these people. But
The psychopaths, man.
yeah,
You
but
gotta be psychopath first.
so
no one's going to understand a psychopath unless you're a psychopath or you spent a lot of time around them. You know, unfortunately, like it's a mind state that I think is inconceivable to, you know, most people, and it should be because it's anti-human, you know. So
yeah. So I'll just read this part of this essay. So this is a lady named Angela Edwards, who I guess she's a painter or something. The fundamentals of utilizing the Qliphoth to perfect being of becoming in nothingness, everything in the path transfixed of the void. Oh, okay. As a practitioner of the left-hand path, again, I'm reading this, and as an artist, period. Okay, she made a grammar error. That's okay. I have always been fascinated by the role of psychosexual transgression through extremes in the role of things sacred, prostitution, female psychosexuality. The type of works is directly related to ideology through ritual, using the tunnels of the Sephiroth of the Qliphoth, tree of death. In these practices, the left-hand path is not evil as such. When relating to the right-hand path, ideology or philosophy, both are neither good or bad. In the profane misconception or work to the same goal of being united with the spirits. In my actions, experiencing through choice extreme sexuality or violence in my rituals, sperm, female discharge, and blood are all used to activate these radical, uncompromising highways, using the left-hand path rituals of abolishing all through sex creation and blood sacrifice. That in the practitioner's descent of full surrender of oneself to the depths, transform him or her to the practitioner's full ascension of untainted divinity, to reach our fully activated by the radiating black sun that empowers the abyss, our Luciferian natures fully revealed. The void of spirituality or consciousness, as I would see it, the world's computer to the root of all. So they're trying to hack all of creation through this stuff. Okay. The void is another aspect found in the daemon chronozone. There's chronozone, an element explored in chronozone. Sorry, I always pronounce that wrong. A chronozone, an element explored in Sethian philosophy. In the works of Thomas Carlson, also chronozone can be linked directly to the void, as chronozone is said to be the gatekeeper to the Qliphothic universe. Crowley.
Right.
So that, you know, this actual working may have started later. I mean, we can maybe tie it back, but it may have actually, I was talking about Sabbath Zebi, but, you know, Crowley, he's the gatekeeper of this, you know, he opened the gate for chronozone. So this is, you know, interesting
in
time.
Algeria with Norberg, right?
Yeah.
Was it Norberg? I forget.
The guy went completely insane because he had to be sodomized to do the ritual. So he brought this you know, very promising poet who was gay, who was in love with him. And then the guy was driven absolutely, he's completely mad. You know, he just, the rest of his life, he was destroyed. But so
he was attacked by Karanzan via Crowley. Crowley turned into Karanzan and started attacking him.
Okay. Okay, I'll say that again. Also, Karanzan can be linked directly to the void, as Karanzan is said to be the gateway to the Qliphothic universe. That this daemon acts as a control panel of energy, translating as the void, the universal light that operates the abyss. This philosophy regarding these elements and aspects of Karanzan's character are reiterated in the Typhonian grimoire, The Night Side of Eden by Kenneth Grant. Grant describes Karanzan as the gateway to the Qliphoth, the governing energy that operates all transmissions and access for the practitioner into the void, abyss, and Qliphothic realms. In these aspects, Karanzan is characterless and more a reflection of our total darker consciousness. He is also darker universal energy as found in the symbols of chaos magic, the cause of all transmissions and effects. In chaos magic, the teachings are to invoke no gods or spirits, only universal energy alone, to therefore become Karanzan. The ideology, okay, it goes on, in placing no superiority on our devotional practices, and all spirits being the void's energy or merge abyss in nothingness. The chaos magic practitioner reaches equality within, nothing being sacred to the gods. And it just keeps going. And these aspects, chaos magic is the mother cult of the void and the abyss. So it gets very, very, the illuminators of Thanatos, Austin O'Spare. So this goes through all, I mean, basically what you're saying ties into Crowley, sex magic. Wow. Okay.
It
Yeah.
sounds like the rationalization and ideology I'm used to hearing a lot of psychopaths, like this is kind of what I was saying, the whole like equal, like opposite but equal, kind of this, it's what's being presented to people nowadays in culture creation, in my opinion. It's this idea with villain culture being pushed constantly. It's like this idea, it's like you can either be famous for doing something really good, or you can do something really bad, or you can be really powerful by helping a ton of people, or you can be really powerful by destroying a ton of people. And it's constantly being presented as like equal paths, you know what I mean? That it's like you can have the same amount of power, it's just whether you choose to be a good guy or a bad guy, and that's kind of like how, like almost everything you were saying is like kind of how, you even have satanic mentality in like Buddhism and stuff, where they can take the idea of non-duality and feel like that means that there's no good or bad, there's no objective morality, and it's like, well, if that was the case, then karma wouldn't be a thing. It's like if you could do any action and it generates neither negative or positive karma, then it's like we would have no mechanism for like for the way the universe works. There is cause and effect, that's natural law in my experience, and that when it's interesting, a lot of the stuff she says, and there's a lot of stuff I feel about, Crowley and a lot of these different things, is like this idea that, it's power for the sake of power, like, yeah, you guys are right hand practitioners, I'm a left hand practitioner, like, but we're all getting the same thing, and in Tibetan Buddhism is one of the things that I really like that comes up a lot, is that they have this huge tradition of, working against and to transform the Bon religion, like dark magicians and sorcerers and stuff like that. And that basically they talk about, as you come into the spiritual progression of like awareness and everything, like your own everything, like you gain these spiritual abilities of, flight or like fast walking or astral projection, all these different things that kind of just come as like a natural, like as you're aligning yourself with like the universe and Godhead and like universal will, that just naturally occur. But then you also have people that just want that shit and they don't care about the personal, like side of things. And that to me is left hand path. Is this idea is like, that they see the goal as being able to have this ability to enact their own will and power on the world, despite of whether or not it's best for other people in the world and everything. And they have all these rationalizations, like any addict would, of like why it's okay for them to do that, And so I don't know, that was maybe a ramble, but it was just very like, when I was listening to it, I'm like, oh God, this sounds so similar to like so much like bullshit propaganda, like mindfuckery that I heard from my, on, because they have these very complex ideologies and these very complex, metaphysical mechanisms that they feel like they are masters of, even when we look at false flags or predictive programming and being like, oh, like people are like, oh, like, they need to let us know what's going on ahead of time, because that's part of how they can avoid some karmic impact, and anyone who's like rational, I feel like, and not a psychopath, can look at that logic and be like, why the fuck does that make sense? Like, why is it that you would think that if you can just tell a person that you're going to kill him before you kill him, that somehow you've like escaped this karmic repercussions? Or if you were to like train someone to be killing people in rituals like you did with me, that somehow well, I'm not the one with the knife in my hand, therefore, this karma is falling on this person that we've chosen. I feel like for myself and for probably most people, we can be like, if we genuinely believe in like true morality and stuff like that, that is a falsehood. You know what I mean? Like, you're creating the circumstances for this negative karma that would never have occurred without you creating those circumstances. But so much of the psychopath's mindset is that they're going to do what they're going to do, what they want to do, what's self-serving, and they're going to have, a million different mental acrobatics and metaphysical, rationales on why it is that the thing they're doing is the right thing and is going to somehow, they're going to be able to do it and not experience the karma of it and stuff like that. So I don't know. Sorry, it's like a little
like
rambly, but it's
that's like the illusion that they have to, like they put themselves in an illusion where there is no morality, and
and they do get worldly power, like, but they don't, they're not gaining like true power of aligning themselves with, with God, with the universe, with like the overall, positive, push of life. Ultimately, like, life always overcomes death, light always overcomes dark. That's just the nature of things. Like, change is the only constant, but in my opinion, like, we're not changing into chaos. We're consistently changing into something that's like a little bit more ordered or self-aware.
But okay, back to kill.
It's something I found really really powerful in the Buddhist practices, is like doing like deity practice, like with like Tara, for example, or something. Is like they have, they even in like the verses talk about, that, having a Tara that is there to destroy foes' magical diagrams, and like all these different things. It's very interesting, like how much like, doing these like these practices, it's very interesting. But it seems like, Tibetan Buddhism is like very well versed in dealing with the bond, dealing with Black magicians and their different like tactics and abilities and stuff. And it to me, it was almost like kind of mind-blowing to do those practices and to see that, to me, it was stuff that like just still feels very, even though I went through it, very woo-woo and out there, but then to also recognize that this is a battle that's been going on for like a really really long time. And and people can come back to Buddhism more and more nowadays as like being so valid from a psychological standpoint, from a metaphysical standpoint, from a physical standpoint, because of all their observations and stuff. And to me, it's like, it was just another thing that was very validating to the occult abuse and stuff that I went through. That's something that they very much acknowledge too, is that you have these, these other, forces, and they have their own techniques and their own methods and different stuff that they're using to employ, to create, negative influences on the world, when, they're trying to counteract it with positive and transformative ones. So I probably do have to go soon, though.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, sorry about my rant there.
No, I
freaked out.
too,
I never said that to anybody. You just forget you heard that. I never told anybody that. I just said that in public. They're going to come after me. Okay. But okay, I'll just read this real quick and see if this maybe relates to the thing, that lower chakra you talked about. So this is from that same lady. So the Qliphoth is activated by the black sun, radiating light into the dark light bearer. Also, that is Lucifer uniting Lucifer with Babylon in abyss union holy. This is another aspect that fits into the ideologies of Quiambanda, as Pomba Gira is the wife of Exu. Quiambanda, I think that's Brazilian. Quiambada, Lucifer counterpart. In these spirits, we not only find examples of female sexuality or psychosexuality, as Lilith is often referred to as hell's whore, soiled imperfection equating perfection, but in the whore that is open to all without judgment. The sacramental spiritual healing unconditional that is also dualistically invoked. Sorry, skim through this. Okay, Lilith who resides wait, as Hell's whore again, like Lilith, who resides upon Malkuth, minus Lilith's colder vampiric manifestations. Lilith's whore resides at the base of the Malkuth in the Qliphoth roots that translate as the earth, the holy, unholy filth of universal everything, for holy is the whore. This very bad writer. It keeps going, but I don't want to read that anymore. But does that make any sense? Like, I'm wondering if that's somehow related to that sexual abuse and that potentially invocation of that low Malkuth connecting with the lower chakra.
I mean, yeah, I would say so, because I think that's a lot of what what the anchoring in of any of like the whole occult, dark occult allied part of the system is that, you mentioned like a balancing point where you have the dark and the light. And in my experience, it's like that's this the balancing point. The whole system is built off of daytime, nighttime, and everything. And the core, and then the inversion of the core that then gets turned into this this basically like mother of darkness type character, that sees themselves as the consenting consort to the dark god, Lucifer, whatever. And then anyone else that is expected of you too, because that's that's your role of like of sacred whore. And what's interesting to me though too is that from like a system standpoint, like where that part, even though that's like where the part was created, is that in that initial core split, which is at kind of like your center anchoring point, where we have daytime system above, nighttime system below, is that most of the time she quote unquote lived at the bottom chakra though. So even though she was initially split at the very first trauma, essentially, that's then the part that is triggered and molded into like this this black mother, the kind of like the occult royalty personality that that is going to have see themselves as hierarchy in the system, see themselves as part of an external hierarchy of like an occult order, and is going to see themselves as like the consort to the dark god. But you're also going to, in my experience, have the dark god entity also living in that area, basically. So essentially that they become like that's what's happening. The nighttime inversion is to now like they're the heads of the consciousness essentially, and are completely aware and in control of the body, and all the daytime tree of life stuff is completely subjugated or buried during that time. So I mean, I don't know if it makes sense, like to me from like a system like physical standpoint, like the archetypes we're talking about and where they quote unquote like live on like the system graph, sounds like pretty identical, I guess, and sounds like it's pretty similar to like what a lot of people have described in their own stuff. It's part of why like Fritz Springmeier, different stuff, you can read these texts that are essentially like manuals, where it's like a survivor can read about what may not be identical in specific terms or names for certain parts, but it's always identical, like the processes, the roles, the relationships of these parts to each other, like always modeling them after that same relationship that you were talking about. It's like everyone's going to have a version of that relationship and that dynamic mirrored in their own system if they've gone through the cult abuse and they are performing, in rituals in these different ways.
Great. That's very
Great.
No, I don't mean what I didn't mean you saying that what you talked about is great. I just think
You're funny, Hans. It's all good. I'm just kidding.
no, it's not great. It sucks. But you know, something sucks. No,
But it makes sense.
That ties it in, right? So at least I think is it getting closer a little bit to, and this is like the most, it does all these invocations, but you see, I'm thinking that there is, even on a personal level, there is some tie-in because there is, again, but my hypothesis is that even these lower level organizations are generating energy by those who are directing them, right? So kind of like a grid structure. So even they, whatever they're doing, they may think they're like kings, but there's people above them and people above them. You know what I mean? But then they're also getting, they're going to have power on the people below, but other people are, directing them. And I think that's, you know what I mean? So you're getting even like someone like reading one of these books or something. They're not some powerful magician most likely, but they're going to get involved in something. They may get possessed. They may, contribute to this overall process. But well,
Have you guys seen Cabin in the Woods?
no, I haven't.
Not
Is it good?
yet. I was told
What?
I
Oh my
should.
God, you guys have to watch it. It felt like such a revelation of method movie. It's like, but it's horror comedy. I'm a fan of that genre. But yeah, I mean the whole premise of that is that, they're setting up a ritual. The US the underground US government is setting up a ritual to sacrifice these group of kids that each one is representative of a certain archetype and everything, but they have at the exact same moment rituals being coordinated in all of these different other countries by their intelligence agencies, basically. So because
right.
in their mind there's these old gods, like that they're trying to appease with this sacrifice ritual, and basically they need at least one ritual on Earth to occur to appease the old gods. They're the old gods are going to destroy the Earth, so it's kind of almost putting them also in like a positive light, because it's like, oh well, it's either this or like the whole Earth gets destroyed, but essentially it's them, that they've it's all of these different intelligence agencies are networked all over for essentially the purpose of making sure at least one of them goes off without a hitch. And that's kind of what I perceive when it comes to like what you're saying. It's like, everyone's going to be doing their rituals because they want to for their own reasons, but also you're going to have like a larger structure that is, helping to make sure that, more and more of these are coordinated throughout the year at the specific time, so that, as each level you go up, it's almost like that they're harnessing more and more energy of the people below them by knowing that, on an individual level, people are enacting these things, but also on like a spiritual level, everyone's connecting on like like a wavelength, energetic level on this kind of stuff, and it grows the egregores, grows the momentum, and all that kind of stuff. But I'm sorry, I do have to go.
Oh, it's okay.
Well, I gotta go too.
Everyone should.
It's all.
Everyone needs to please visit Desert Dakini on YouTube to see your work, Carrie, and all as well. Carrie, if you'd like to speak about it, I'll give you a minute or two, please. If tell us maybe what you've been working on real quick, and then we'll let you go on.
Like between jobs and different stuff, like it's been a crazy year and a half, so I haven't done a whole lot. I've tried to keep up on a few interviews like with you, Sean, because it's good to feel like I'm doing something in the advocacy side of things. I don't have a whole lot of new content on my channel, but it is something I'm currently working on. So anyone that is an ally and wants to learn more about dissociation, I definitely send them there. I try and break things down in a very simple way so that people can understand how trauma affects the brain, if they're an ally, and then especially if they're a survivor. This is meant to be very gentle for people that are new in healing to just start really learning how to like gain that internal communication and gain some relief from the really intense PTSD symptoms and stuff that most survivors are going to be dealing with. So
you're doing God's work. Thank you so much.
That's great. And just a quick question. I mean, are there things that are triggering for survivors, like say, like Fritz Springmeier's books or certain movies or things like that, or is it something they have to be cautious of, or is it not an issue?
People just have to really go off of their own experience when it comes to that. Like, yes, if you've gone through occult abuse, like things are going to be triggering, but sometimes it's going to be things that are that catch you off guard. Many times that's the case, because it's things that are reminiscent, certain things that put you in the same state of mind or whatever. But yeah, with things like Fritz or something like that, it's, it's not going to make much sense to a survivor early in healing, but it's the kind of material that, like, I always recommend for myself, was very validating later on in healing, once I already had a lot more internal knowledge of my programming and system and stuff like that, that I could then come to material like that. And it was triggering, but almost in a good way, a validating way, because it was like, okay, I'm seeing written back to me the same things that I've, encountered on my own through my own internal investigation in my system, essentially. So yeah, I just tell survivors, they just have to monitor how, like, if they're experiencing a ton of emotional upheaval when in response to certain stuff, then yeah, there's something there. And if they're in a grounded place to start looking at it, then journal about it and, use this as an entry point to healing. But if it's too much and it's overwhelming, then, you just have to work on something that feels more manageable.
Great.
Come back to it later.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully we can talk again, but like the Greenbaum interview, you familiar with that? So he okay, that's very important. She's gone. Oh, okay,
she just popped out. So
okay, that's
it
fine.
might have been her phone was running out of power.
Yeah, we did a long time. The Greenbaum interview, we can talk about that later. So he was head of the. Oh, okay, yeah, real briefly. So Greenbaum, there's one cassette that survived this. He was head of the American Society of Hypnotists, and he's talking about how they're finding all these ritual abuse cases all over the country. And he did this analysis, and he ties it into the Kabbalah, using it as a structure system. So it's quite an interesting. I think I'll probably upload that on my channel, just the original interview tape that I have. Second tape is missing, but and it's for, hypnotists, right? Or a therapist or whatever. So it really breaks that down quite a bit. So anyways, but thank you so much, Carrie. It was awesome.
I think she might still be able to hear you audio. I don't know why it just dropped out of the OBS, but I see her on the Video Ninja here. So Carrie, do you still hear us? You do? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, okay.
We're not getting the audio.
Okay.
I don't know. Here, let me try to refresh this one time, just to have a proper good.
Yeah, I have to go too. So we might as well just call it a day.
We'll call it a night. Yeah, we'll call it a night. I'm sorry, Carrie, that we can't have your video here, but still, thank you so much for both of you sharing your time, and we appreciate your words. And people can find all the links for Carrie and Hans as well. Thank you, Carrie. We'll let you go. And Hans, if you want to say anything about your show, like promote it a little bit before you go as well, please do so.
Yeah, I'm finally trying to dial this in. So I've got about 5 channels, The Resonant State. So bye, Carrie. We'll hopefully talk to you soon. Yeah, so it's called The Resonant State. Check it out. Spotify, BitChute, Rumble, YouTube, Odyssey. And yeah, so it's
well,
it's going.
It's great that you have a show. I mean, I'm just very happy with that. And because you weren't like, you were making so many shows back in the day with other people, and then there was you almost kind of went away. And now you're on track, and you're really moving, and you got your own vehicle now for your words, and that's great. I love that. So people should check out The Resonant State, and they can find you at hansutter.com, and you have a donate page there as well. So if anybody feels that they got some reward from this conversation and they want to reward you, Hans, they should please do so. And thank you all for listening, and we appreciate your ears and your attention. Hopefully we will see you next time on Wake the Dead. Thank you.